Hey everyone, what is up? I am Exit over here, and I'm here with my review for Star Trek Discovery, Season 2, Episode 3, titled Point of Light. This review is kind of a week late, considering that the new episode of Star Trek was last night. But yeah, there's going to be huge spoilers for the episode from this point on, although if you're watching this, you've probably already seen the episode, so yep. So one thing that was cool about the start of this episode was that the previously on bit that was at the very start was actually narrated in Klingon, and it was a nice little touch. And there's a lot of bits of this episode where they kind of gel together the Klingon and English, and that, like, there was a bit where I know that last season most of the Klingon scenes were actually done all in Klingon, just with English subtitles, and that continued for most of last season. And while it's cool, it gets a little bit frustrating when the only time you hear these people speak is in an alien language that doesn't exist. But this time around, they actually did a good job of counteracting that by, there was a bit where Laurel was speaking in Klingon. She started off speaking in Klingon with English subtitles, but then it quickly changed to her speaking English with Klingon subtitles. It was a nice little change. But most of this episode was all about the Klingons and kind of where they're at after the end of last season. So we kind of catch up with Laurel, with the Klingon kind of Game of Thrones, if you will. We catch up with Tyler. We catch up with Philippa Giorgio as well in Section 31. And what is all happening there? Unfortunately, though, this episode does kind of suffer from the fact that the pacing is terrible. We'll have a 5-minute scene with the Klingons, then cut to a 30-second scene with Michael Burnham, and then cut back to a 5-minute scene with the Klingons. And that continues for most of the episode, things like that. There was also this weird thing where most of the scenes of the episode were shot upside down and then slowly eased upright. It was just kind of frustrating to see that. There was also a decent portion of this episode that was all about Tilly and dealing with May with the Spore kind of thing. I said in my last review that was my least favorite part of the previous episode, and while I was interested in that plotline more this episode, it didn't really do much else for me this time around. One thing that interested me was the fact that the Spore actually wanted to kind of see the captain, and at first I thought she was talking about Gabriel Lorca. I was like, wow, this is really interesting. Where are they going with this? But that turned out that she just wants Stamets, and she wants to go inside the mycelium network, it looks like. That was interesting enough, but I'm not really enjoying it. And overall, I think this episode was kind of a downgrade from the last two. The last two felt really good, really kind of high budget, proper Star Trek. This episode, however, feels a lot more like how last season felt, which, to be fair, I enjoyed last season, but most of the episodes from last season kind of just meshed together because there wasn't much distinguishing each episode from the other. It was just one long story going through. The last two episodes, they were easy to differentiate because they were so different and they were so unique. But this episode, like I said, feels a lot like last season, and that definitely didn't excite me as much as the last two did. One thing that was cool was that we saw the creation of the D7 Klingon battlecruiser. That's probably the most famous Klingon battlecruiser seen all the time in Star Trek, the original series and the early movies. The first 6 movies, basically the only Klingon ship you see besides the Bird of Prey is the D7. We also see a lot of D7 classes in Deep Space Nine. We see one in Star Trek Voyager. I think we don't see any in Enterprise, do we? Now that I'm saying that, I actually think I remember seeing one in Enterprise, but that wouldn't make any sense because this is 100 years after Enterprise and the D7 is only getting created. Well, I just blew up Star Trek canon in my head, so oops. But yeah, the D7 Klingon ship is cool as shit, and I can't wait to see it in live action in this show. We had more stuff with Spock, basically finding out that Spock is kind of a murderer and he's kind of wanted by Starfleet. He snapped the necks of 3 Starfleet medical personnel and he ran off, and Amanda shows up and she's like, listen, Michael, we gotta find Spock. This is serious. And then Michael's like, yeah, but I'm the reason Spock kind of doesn't like talking to people. And Amanda's like, what? And Michael goes, yeah, I'm that. And Amanda goes, okay. And then Amanda walks off, and then Michael's kind of like, oh, yeah. That wasn't very good. I'm not gonna lie. I mean, it makes sense. They can't have Spock and Michael be on good terms, considering that we never see her at all after Discovery, or so far we haven't seen her in any other Star Trek property. So it would make sense that her and Spock wouldn't be exactly friendly towards each other. But at the same time, the way that was handled in this episode really wasn't good at all. The Klingon stuff that we had with Ash Tyler was actually interesting. While I wasn't too invested in the Klingon politics kind of stuff, I did really enjoy that Ash, I get that, like, the Klingons would not just let him into their society. He looks like a human. He has human organs. Yes, he can speak fluent Klingon, but to the Klingons, he is human. Just because he used to be Vok isn't going to change how the Klingons perceive him. So it was really interesting to see him and see how he's kind of gelling into Klingon society. And that was one of my favorite parts of the episode. And then there was a bit towards the end where Jojo shows up and she takes Ash from Klingon, from Kronos. And now Ash and Jojo are both with Section 31. And we did get a little glimpse of the Section 31 ship, which is probably setting up for the Section 31 show. And that's kind of the, I want to say, tagline of this episode is everything that happens this episode is setting up for something else. This is all just moving the pieces to where they need to be. And that's why I think this episode really fails where the last two succeeded. The last two didn't try to set up things. It just let the plot go where the plot needed to go. This episode, it felt like they really wanted each of the main plot lines to be in a certain place by the end of this episode, and so they set out to make this episode all about putting those plot pieces where they needed to go. The JoJo stuff was just to, and even the Ash stuff to a degree, was just to set up the Section 31 show. The Spock and Amanda thing was just to set up why Michael and Spock don't get along. And the Tilly and May stuff was just to set up the Spore being kind of in the cage thing at the end of the episode. So I don't really have much I want to say about this, and since the review's already over a week late, I probably shouldn't do much and just kind of do my review for the new episode, so I will leave this there. But I would give this episode a 6.5 out of 10. It definitely wasn't as enjoyable as the previous two, but it's not terrible either. So thank you very much for watching, and if you enjoyed this video, please consider liking and subscribing. Thank you, and have a great day.